Welcome to PhD with Woman on It, Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hack delivered will be by our guest, Bella Bardswell. Isabella. In the longer terms, we're just talking about a beautiful name of Isabella, which is shortened to Bella. I trust you're okay with both names, Isabella.
Oh, of course. Isabella reminds me of my mum telling me off, but generally I'm okay with both.
Well, let me remind you and all of those who are listening to us, this is a grassroots community that focuses on the woman on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle because empathy is my motto, and empathy is critical to scoring your objectives and delivering key results. Now, let's go back to our topic. Score your objectives and deliver key results. In today's fast-paced business landscape, organizations strive to stay focused, aligned, and achieve meaningful outcomes. Objectives and key results have emerged as a powerful framework to drive success and foster a culture of high performance. For this PhD episode, we are joined by Bella, co-founder of Stellafai, a seasoned expert in cultural change, innovation, agile methodologies, and design thinking. Bella's extensive experience includes leading digital transformation and value advisory teams at Google and as the head of Agile Practice EMEA at IBM. Join us and listen to our recording. We are recording today because of family and important matters that are beyond our control. However, if you have questions, I'm sure you can post them and we will be happy to answer them later on. So, Bella, let's start with a simple question. Where are you joining us from today?
I am in London today, and unusually I can also add the word sunny to the front of London because it is actually really lovely and sunny and warm today at the moment.
Well, I hope you're going to have a chance to enjoy that beautiful day. I see you're indoors. Is that a co-working space you're using?
That's exactly right. Yes, so I'm hoping the internet's going to hold up because it can sometimes be a little bit flaky here. But yes, I'm in a place called Aldgate, in a well-known co-working space. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, let's not mention the name. I suspect what it is. Aldgate was the station I used to ride, and I really vividly remember that station because I was in London in 2016, I believe. That was the bombing moment. I remember I couldn't get a connection. That was a very difficult time for London and overall for people in UK, because as we know, we need a lot of power, a lot of commitment of health services, and also some project management. However, let's go to the project management using OKRs and why and what is the definition. We're going to nail it down today. So, Bella, why did you decide to go into this methodology? Why is it better than others?
That's a great question. I've always been a believer. Actually, at university, I studied motivation, and there's two very clever fellows who anyone that knows things around the psychology of motivation, Locke and Latham, will have come across. And they were doing work back in the 60s and basically researching the power of goals and how they can help drive engagement, motivation, success, alignment, and when you transfer that into a business setting, those are all very, very good things. And at IBM, they had a process for setting goals, annual goals. They kind of worked, but on every project and in life, I've always been a bit of a goal setter. And then I came across this thing, OKRs, objectives and key results, when I was still at IBM, and I was actually reading a book about Google, and It's like, oh, this is interesting. Found out a bit more about it. And then when I had the chance to go and work for Google, I really started to see how they've used it, how they use OKRs and goals to actually run their company, how to create alignment between all the teams, how to make sure people are focused on a very limited set of things and so make much more progress on them. And then this idea of setting stretch goals to sort of make people rethink what they're doing and do things differently to reach and innovate to a higher level. And I was just blown away by how it affected me, what an effective way it was to lead, and had a chat with another friend of mine at IBM, Tim, and we decided to co-found a company to help people achieve their outcomes. And a lot of that is based around using goals, and OKRs is a really, really amazingly powerful way of doing that. I wouldn't say it's the only way or the best way. That's very context specific, but certainly for organizations like Google, any team or company that's trying to achieve a significant change, it's the best one that I've come across in terms of its results.
Okay, so the next question will be, what were you using at IBM, or which methodologies you used that were not quite perfect?
Yeah, so I don't know that I do call what IBM did when I was there, and I'm sure it's evolved since then, a methodology. They set annual, what they called personal business objectives. Each person wrote them at the start of the year, and some of them were given to you. And then you kind of put them in a box, a tool, you never looked at them. Then at the end of the year, you wrote up how you'd done, kind of in the context of that. But what I often found is at the end of the year, the things I set out to do as my goals at the start weren't the right thing to do anymore. And so I pivoted and moved away from them. But that gave me a bit of a challenge at the end of the year to explain the impact I'd had, because it was in the context of the business and the client I was working with, rather than these sort of static, very sort of bland, uninspiring goals that have been set at the start. And I think that is super, super common in the world of goal setting. And the other thing that is a bit of an anti-pattern that often happens in goal setting is they're set from above. People tell you what your goals are, rather than you having a stake in going, what do I want to achieve? What do I think would be impactful for the business and the things my organization or team or department is trying to achieve? And there's a very famous model called management by objectives, which was a precursor to OKRs in Intel back in the 80s, and that created all sorts of issues. If you get given your objectives, then there's a real risk that you're not really engaged or bought into them. You weren't a part of setting them. But also another really common thing that you see, and this was the case with management by objectives, is your performance was measured directly based on what those goals were. Now in IBM, there was an acknowledgement that things change, and so that didn't really happen, although it was a factor. But some organizations impose goals and targets, and your salary and take home is directly related to how you perform against that. And that seems like a great thing to do. Well, I'm going to really, really motivate people by making what they earn dependent on whether they hit those goals. But the reality is, businesses aren't that black and white and simple. There are only so many things you can measure with confidence. So you've immediately limited down what goals you could set. But even worse than that, people start focusing at those goals at the expense of everything else. So what if things change? What if actually there's something else, or that's going to be more impactful for the overall business strategy? Or perhaps there's an opportunity to work with another team to do something that's greater than you just working tirelessly in pursuit of that one goal that's going to give you a bigger bonus at the end of the year. So for me, those sort of patterns that you see time and time again in industry around people setting number goals and your take home being limited to them, not recognizing that they need to change, are some of the really common anti-patterns. And a little bit of that happened in IBM, but I think a little bit of that happens in most organizations, particularly the bigger ones.
Well, it comes to mind, there's a great quotation by General Eisenhower, who said, "Plans are nothing, planning is everything." So speaking about planning for 1 year in advance. It almost sounds like a New Year resolution, which we know that is, so many people are focused in January, and by December they just don't even know what was that all about. Where was our mindset back then?
Maybe not December, maybe kind of February, March time.
Exactly. And all that spending money on gym membership and diet membership and all of that goes down the drain. Anyway, let's go to goal setting and the top-down model. So you suggest that the best approach is if there is a combination of the two, or is it more of initiative from the workers? What's the best outcome?
I think you've got it exactly. Yeah, it's a combination of both. So another thing that's commonly happens and goes wrong is people try to set goals in a vacuum of actually understanding what the organization is trying to achieve. You need to have a sense of the broader why and the strategy, and it's amazing how commonly that just isn't there. And I'd ask, every manager, every leader, every person on this call, if you went round and asked the 10 people sitting nearest you, why are we doing what we're doing? What's what I'm doing? How's that contributing to my company or my organization's overall strategy? I suspect you get a lot of blank faces. Certainly when I ask that question, I have a lot of sort of, that's a great question. So first of all, you need to have that clarity on the strategy and the why. That's that top bit, that mission and that vision. And then from the bottom up, you've got that deep contextual understanding of what you're doing and what's going to work, and that understanding at detail that you could never expect your leaders, top level leaders defining strategy, to understand. So then there's this middle bit where you need to create connective tissue that connects execution and that deep context and competence that exists in the doers of your organization with the leaders who are setting the strategy and thinking about things with a much more external and strategic perspective, often reporting into board members wondering about share prices and market values and all those sort of things. And so that top down bottom up bit, you have to have both of those coming together to define objectives. Now at the top level of an organization, if you're defining strategic goals, I think that probably is more top down. That's an example where that context, that conversation, and it's deeply complex. It needs to be reflected into a set of strategic objectives that everyone can then start to hang off what they're doing. As you come further down and you're actually defining objectives maybe for a quarter, not a year, which I would recommend, by the way, at lower down within the organization, that's when it needs to be at least 50-50, if not more 60-70 bottom up, with just people going, yeah, we're aligned, this is directly going to support, this is strategically aligned, this is the right things to do, this is going to support the direction the company is trying to go in. So I think, just as you said, I've said in a very long-winded way, yes, top down and bottom up is really important.
Right. So we are talking about setting objectives, setting goals. Now, defining each stage. You talked about the initial why we are doing what we are doing discussion. How much time of each stage is necessary, not to just wash out with ideas and not and focus really on the objectives part of things.
Do you mean in terms of the sort of planning cycles and how long goals should exist for before you refresh and set a new set of goals?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So I mentioned this a little bit when I was speaking before. It's really, really context dependent, and there's a trick here, which is that, or a sweet spot here, where you need goals that are going to give a little bit of stability and dependability for people to hang all their planning off. But it also needs to have enough agility in it and be reviewed frequently enough that it's going to be able to change as the organization and the environment that you operate in needs to change. And we are bombarded all over hearing about the rapid pace of change in our world, and organizations need to be able to respond to that. Generally, as a starting pattern, company strategy would be annual. You'd have a strategy which might be 3 or 4 years, even 5. You'd need a set of strategic objectives would be annual at the most. Sometimes that needs to be less. A new startup that's really needs to be able to pivot quite dramatically as it's learning and adapting, that could be 3 months. As you move into the organizations that sit under that, 6 months, 3 months is very normal. There are instances I've heard of where people reset them every month. You need to be careful with doing that, because there's a lot of work involved in writing really good goals and then setting good measures against them. And if you're in a constant cycle of doing that, it really eats into the time where you actually do the doing. So there's certainly a balance to be struck. I think big organizations can't really change them as often as smaller organizations, and that's because of the interdependencies. If someone at say you have the strategies company levels at level 0, and you've got sort of 6 levels, if you're changing something at level 2, level 3, that's going to have a ripple effect on what everyone underneath is doing potentially. That's got to be assessed, that's got to be considered. So that's something that's really important to think about as well. But at Google, for example, where I was, we had annual objectives. Our EMEA team had 6 monthly, and that broke down into team and individuals at 3 months. But there was the opportunity to make changes to our measures and even our objectives in exceptional circumstances when we needed to. So that gives that nice blend of, we've got enough certainty to commit to some things for the next quarter, which means we can all focus on them and experiment and try things out, but there's still the ability for us to flex and change 4 times a year in terms of hitting our annual objectives.
So would you say that using it as a startup is also manageable, or is it too small of an organization to set up such an OKR?
The bigger you are, so I think one of the big challenges that OKRs help solve is a communication problem. So, I was talking a little while ago about that connective tissue between strategy and execution, or strategy and delivery. Those objectives and those key results and the connection between them starts to create a connection of a communication chain of, so the example I gave was 6 levels. I understand how what I'm doing maps right the way up to how what I'm doing today, to maybe writing a test script, is contributing to our company's success and our strategy. And that's really powerful, but it also means you have an understanding of what those objectives are through the organization, which that question, asking people why are we doing what we're doing, is actually, I think, very, very rare. So I think having that sorry, I've slightly lost my train of thought, but having that ability to draw the connections is really, really important. Sorry, could you remind me what the question was, because I went off on a tangent?
That's absolutely fine. I was asking about the key benefit and how is it helping. So you were talking about communication, but I'm mindful about not everybody is communicating clearly, and
okay, yes. So you asked about size of organization as well. That's the thing. So the bigger the organization, the harder comms gets, because there's many, many more people to communicate to. So I think big organizations can get huge benefits from using frameworks like OKRs to connect up the work that's happening across them, both laterally and up and down. Actually, it's not just about up and down, it's about joining up with teams, collaborating, understanding what people are doing, avoiding duplication. When you scale that right back down to smaller organizations, those benefits are maybe less important. An organization of 20 people probably doesn't have the communication alignment problems that a 10,000 people organization would. What you might be struggling with more in a small organization is focus. There's a million things to do, only so many people, things are happening all over the place. But again, OKRs can bring huge benefits in that respect. And also that cadence of checking in on, are we moving the needle on the things we decided matter most on a regular basis, gives you real clarity on, are you making the progress that you set out to with the activities that you decided to do. So my startup is six people, and we use them. And they're extremely powerful. It's predictable, really, that I'm going to use them because I think they're really, really powerful. When we talk to organisations, we've talked to over 100 sort of startup scale-ups. We think there's a point around 30 to 40 to 50 people where you start to get those communication challenges, where that alignment seems to drift. That's the point at which you can see a real sudden positive impact from using a goal setting framework like OKRs.
So goal setting framework, what program do you need for it? Can Excel help there, or is there more accurate programs that you should be using?
So you don't have to use software. Excel's fine, PowerPoint's fine. The thing that matters with goals is that, as we talked about before, that everyone that's going to be responsible for delivering the goal is involved in defining the goal and buys into it. And then the second thing that matters a lot is that people come together and they reflect regularly. You know, that example of you write it in January and then you've forgotten it, like your New Year's resolution, it's long forgotten in December. What if you looked at it every 2 weeks and you checked in on how you were doing and you had some results to update about the progress you were making? That creates an opportunity for reflection, for discussion, and to decide, do we carry on doing what we're doing, or do we need to change because the needle's not moving on our measures? So that's a really key part of sort of making goals successful. That can be done as long as you've written them down. You've got somewhere you can all come together. You don't need software for that. Software can really help, especially as you start to get a little bit bigger. I mentioned before around that connective tissue laterally and vertically in organizations. That's really hard to do on a Miro board or on Excel or PowerPoint. Software can help you visualize that. Software can send nudges and give you a reminder. Software provides one place everyone just knows to go to update. So there's definitely lots of software options that are specifically around goals and OKRs that can be really valuable. I don't want to do a plug, but I might just mention that my company's building some software to help people with doing that and also help you succeed with delivering them. But because I don't think the software out there, we don't think the software out there is doing enough to help people actually achieve their goals. It's just a tracking sheet. So yes, I think software can help. And I also think, hence starting a company to do it, there's a lot more that technology can do to help people both define awesome goals, but also to stay true to them, to keep checking in and to learn and adapt as they go to really sort of be successful in achieving them.
Well, I guess technology can help. However, it wouldn't be without the leaders or those who are looking after the technology, without their involvement. And how to involve each team member in the goals achievement process?
I think the answer to that's really simple. Have a workshop, have a discussion, have a call, just get people together and talk about it. And there's lots of, Google it, there's loads and loads of guidance online about how you could run a session to define some goals, to define some key results. We also provide advice and coaching through our platform, and also on our website, and we do consulting as well. So there are lots of organizations out there that can give you a help or have written up some suggested ways of doing things. But the key thing here is just get together and talk about it.
Talk about it, remind people, and be on top of it, communicate, as we talked about that over and over during our PhD. Communication is key, not just in the individual success, but in the overall company success. Now, if I use KPIs, can I still use OKRs?
That's a very, very good question. So a lot of people think KPIs and OKRs, or key results, the key result bit of OKRs, are the same thing. They are not. So let me have a go at explaining the difference. So think of KPIs as your organizational health metrics. How are we performing in how we run our business or our organization? OKRs are about measuring progress. They have a destination. they're vectors. How are we doing in pursuit of moving to another place? So it's a measure of progress towards goals and change. And there's a nice analogy that I like to use, which I think can help. So if you imagine you're in a car and you're driving along, your KPIs are like the health of your car. So what's your rev counter? What's your fuel gauge? How's your oil looking? Things like that. Your speedo. It's telling you how things are running. Your OKRs are like your sat nav. You put in where you're going to go, and it's helping you measure your progress towards that goal. Does that help?
Beautiful analogy. Thank you, Bella. I'm sure there will be more questions. Now, what is the number one mistake people do when starting with OKR? Is there any mistake you can make?
Oh, there are so many. Which one do I pick as the number one? I think set and forget is probably the biggest thing. You know, we've talked about that already. That thing where people put, and it's such a shame, they put lots of effort into writing a really decent set of OKRs, and then they write it in a document, but they don't think about how to make that part of how they work, and they don't check in regularly. They don't do that reflection. They don't see the needles move. It doesn't impact what they do, and so all of that work, honestly, was pointless, because it's just forgotten. It's not guiding them. I'd say that's probably the number one thing that I see. And obviously software can help with that, because you can bring in those little automated nudges. But actually, I think it's broader than that. It's about recognizing that if you're defining the top 3 or 5 objectives that you want to achieve in the upcoming cycle, be that 3, 6 or 12 months, why would you not make that a core part of your weekly check-in meetings, you know, your progress reviews, everything? Because surely that should be guiding every discussion. Are we making progress towards our goals? But so often it doesn't happen. They're written down and forgotten.
So how often would you suggest of checking OKRs?
It does depend a little bit the nature of the team. So as you go further up an organization, it's common that it becomes a little less frequent. One of my bits of advice that I give everyone is try to build it into an existing meeting. Don't add more meeting load. It should fit, because as I just described, it's a core part of what you're trying to do as a team, as a group of people. Weekly, we do at Stellafai. I'd say weekly, bi-weekly for the most, for a team that are sort of in the execution mode. You wouldn't want to leave it more frequently, more rarer than more infrequent than that. And let me explain it. Let me say why in this way. If, let's say, you set some OKRs for a quarter and you check in monthly, that means you only have 2 opportunities at the end of January and at the end of February to learn. So over a whole quarter, you only stopped, reflected, and potentially adapted twice. If you're checking in every 2 weeks, you've more than doubled that. If you check in every week, then you're looking at 12 opportunities in a quarter to reflect, learn, and adapt. And I can tell you, it's very easy to figure out which one of those is more likely to lead to a successful outcome for that team in achieving those goals.
So who would you suggest should look after the overall process? Is there a manager or somebody from the team who wants to be empowered or part of the process? Who is the best fit for this role?
Yeah, I'm really, really glad you asked that question, because actually that was one of my common mistakes that I dismissed in favour of the other one. So now I have a chance to talk about it. You need someone senior that backs using OKRs, that believes in it and is going to push it through. Everyone feels how powerful they are, but in the day-to-day, when you've got your to-do list and you're busy, it's really easy to let it slide. So having that senior exec support or just senior manager makes such a big difference, pushing, driving it, reminding people, asking people why nothing's been updated. So you need that kind of stakeholder, that senior stakeholder sponsor. You then, I think, need someone that gets OKRs. Now, that could be either someone, it could be someone at any level, but someone that's going to bring the content authority, the knowledge of how to be successful with it. That might be someone that's done them before or has that knowledge, or someone who's working very closely with a coach, someone like myself, who can help them make sure things are running in the right way in the organization and bring content. Because realistically, that senior person is unlikely to have the time to dedicate to that. So they need to have a bit more time that they can, depending on how big the implementation is. And we would always recommend starting small, by the way. That would be that OKR champion is the name we give them. Maybe working with a coach, maybe not. Then every objective should have an owner, and every key result should have an owner. And ideally, the key results aren't all owned by the same person. That's a really fantastic way of getting everyone engaged, because they've got responsibility for updating things. Now, important point here is a key result owner is not responsible for doing all the work to move the key results. They're just responsible for gathering the information to tell you whether you're making progress towards your objective. So the objective is what you need to achieve, it's the what, and the key result is the criteria you use to measure progress towards your objective. And you typically have 3 to 5 key results for an objective. So those key results, you want people, if one person has to do all of that, let's say you've got 5 objectives, most people have 3 to 5, wouldn't recommend more than that. If you had 5 objectives and 5 key results, that's 25 things to be updated every week. That sounds like a lot of work. Divide that across the team, make everyone accountable and responsible. Suddenly it's quite manageable. And so that's a really nice structure. So you've got this senior exec sponsor, you've got your OKR champion, maybe working with a coach, someone that owns that objective, who has responsibility for thinking about how work is happening and reflecting on, are you making progress? And then key result owners updating the data so that doesn't become a massive pain for just one person to do.
So now a question that we had previously during our live stream was from one of our audience participant, and she was asking how can she make sure that people are listening to her, because she was banging on the wall. People were not quite bought into the programming language she was using and reporting platform she was using, and even her manager was not checking in. What would be advice from you as a female, how to tackle the challenge of bias, because she was quite young, quite inexperienced. She took on the challenge of managing the project. How would you advise her to deal with this?
God, that's a really tough problem. First thing, maybe, has she got some allies that she could work with? So maybe she's got a champion or a mentor that might be able to deliver a message sideways. I think, sorry, I don't know her name, but X has a really interesting suggestion, and she's got some great rationale for why she wants to make this change. I think it'd be really worth having a conversation. So leverage your network and perhaps people who you have managed to have listen to you. I think the other thing that's often really powerful is people want to be successful. So can you articulate the compelling reason why someone might want to do this, how within a statistic or an outcome that could happen to get people excited? And often storytelling's a really, really good way to do that. I remember Brené Brown calls stories data with a soul, and I love that way of doing it. But if you can find something that's quite attention grabbing and snappy, that maybe while a person doesn't want to listen to the full idea you have, perhaps you can just say, you might want to have a conversation because I've got an idea that will ... So you make it a one-liner that gets their attention to try and sort of get the broader conversation. So use allies, use champions, try and think about something attention grabbing, the sort of clickbait approach, to try and get that conversation. And I guess the other sort of last option, and I've adopted this a couple of times in similar situations, is just to do it. Seek forgiveness, not permission. If you're confident it's going to work and there's sufficient safety in your organization, that is important, then crack on. Then you've got some data. I've done this and this was the result. I think we should scale it out more widely. So that would be my third suggestion. Just do it and seek forgiveness, not permission.
Excellent. Well, Bella, I know that you've been working with big corporations. Now you're running your own startup. I am sure you've experienced some bias. And given the fact that you've got so much experience, what would be your number one advice to all the females or people from minorities who are looking to get into the IT space and they are just not making enough progress? They are not climbing up the ladder. What would be your number one advice how to crackle that glass ceiling?
There's a fantastic quote, and I think I don't know whether you do a little preamble, but I shared it with you as my favorite quote. Mel Robbins said, "There will always be someone who doesn't see your worth. Don't let it be you." And I think that kind of defines me for the first 15 years of my career. I let other people kind of inform what I thought about myself way too much. I mean, we're humans. We can't help it happen a bit. But I think it's great advice. I think if I'd given myself that to myself 5 years into my career, I'd have responded, well, that's really nice, but how do I have self-worth? Like, how do you build that up? And I built up, maybe this is a secret that I don't tell many people, but I've actually built up a little catalogue of stories in my head, but there's actually a document with them in, of things I did where I nailed it, where I smashed it and I was proud of myself. And periodically I have a look at it and I add maybe a couple more. And sometimes those stories were rooted in me getting something wrong, but how I responded to it and demonstrating integrity and being proud of myself. Sometimes I learned a lot and sometimes I just did something really great. It's okay to say and look at something, I did that and it's really great, especially if it's something just for yourself. So think about the things you do and figure out what you're worth, because we all have skills and talents. And if you're trying to get into IT, I guarantee there is a role in that space that will suit everyone. It's such a broad range of skills and talents that are required and needed. And so there's a place for you. Just you've got to see your worth and don't let other people define that. So once you've sort of got that growing muscle of seeing your worth, be yourself. Don't be apologize for who you are or be embarrassed. Maybe don't obsess. I've seen this a little bit in some of the people that I've mentored, that they talk a lot about how bias and privilege is working against them, and it almost becomes an impossible. They almost build their own glass ceiling without it being built for them. So they've got double glazing above their head now to get through. They've got the actual glass ceiling and the one they built. So yes, it's there. Nothing you can do about that. Knowing that it's there won't fix it. You've got to go through it and keep going. So, but knowing your worth, I think, is the best way to get through that. And then the last thing I'd say is I've used mentors and champions an enormous amount to help sponsor me and create opportunities. So do that. Often people that you admire, you assume they've already got thousands of people they're mentoring, but actually they don't. And a lot of them, they just haven't been asked because everyone assumed they've got loads of people they mentor. And it's one of the things they most enjoy doing. So ask that question. Ask if people will be your champion or mentor, but ask people that you actually have you see something in and you think there's a connection. Don't go for the random senior person thing, because it never works. There needs to be something real there around how they operate and you admiring that. And when you get to the point where you could help other people, give back and help them and use your voice.
So many tips and hints. Thank you so much. And indeed, it's a life lesson quote you just used of Mel Robbins. There you go. There will always be someone who can't see your worth. Don't let it be you. I would also add, see your worth and add tax on top of it, just as our previous guest was talking about. Precious Williams talked about having self-worth and adding tax on top of it, because as our previous guest Cindy Gallup says, there is, I actually forgot what she said. Anyway, let's move on to our there you go. Let's move on to another quotation. an objective without a key result is simply a wish. So indeed, as Bella says, if you focus on objective, not so much on hurdles that you are going to have, it's much easier. And that's another opportunity for my quotation, which is, if you focus on positives, the positives get more positive. There you go, PhD positivity hacks delivered today with Bella. Now let's go back to what is the number one book you can sit and think, oh, I wish I read it before I started my career, Bella.
So you gave me this question in advance. Unlike, I might add, most of the ones today. So it's been awesome questions, a really good conversation. But actually, it might have been easier to ask this question without thinking time. I started going into my Audible and going through. But I settled on one, which is Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. And I know some people have kind of bashed that now. But when I read that, it was one of those books where I just found myself nodding, even feeling quite emotional at times about how I'd just accepted things that I should not have accepted. And I allowed myself to be reduced to a smaller role and to take up less space than I should have done, just because that's how the environment inadvertently was shaping around me. I don't think it was malicious by the people I was working with, by the men, but the reality is I took up less space. I allowed natural ways in which women think and undervalue ourselves to shape who I was and how I operated. It is an amazing book. Yes, some of the opinions might be dubious now, but actually read it. I think it's fantastic if you haven't.
Well, Lean In is a movement already, and as we know, Sheryl has left Facebook to focus solely on her Lean In movement. So what are the things that are questionable, Bella? Was there something that you were not so comfortable with from the book Lean In?
Yeah, so I sometimes, Medium is full of people like taking down stuff, and I've seen lots of those headlines with people taking down things, and I think she's had a bit of grief that she was a bit of a sort of bit over the top with some of the things she was saying, which I disagree with, to be honest. And then I think there are some people that have taken issue with the way in which she goes about things, and a little bit alpha female, which can actually backfire a bit. I think every book you read, a business book, you then frame on yourself and think about what would I be comfortable from that book with applying to how I go about. And if you're not comfortable with behaving in a certain way, don't. You know, we've all got to be authentic and maintain our integrity. But I think it was the sort of the labeling of being an over the top feminist, which I, to be really clear, don't agree with. And then this thing around encouraging alpha females that are sort of behave like men in the workplace, which some people sort of drew that parallel. But I can potentially understand a little bit of what they meant, but I'm kind of comfortable with it myself. I really enjoyed the book and it really helped me.
Well, so far the business world is male dominated, and it's been through centuries. As we know, the roles of a female used to be motherhood only, and hence we are living in the circumstances we are living in. However, one thing that we discussed in our previous episodes was the fact that Lean In is really talking about fitting into the system, whereas it's time to reinvent the system so it's more dynamic, it's more welcoming towards the minorities. It is actually seeing leadership not just by male gaze. Now, anything to add?
No, that's fair. Yeah.
There you go. Well, Bella, as we are heading towards the end of our show, there are a couple of more questions I wanted to ask you. And you mentioned your startup. Tell us about that. What is this project objective?
Yeah, so I quit my job and started a company last April with I quit in April. We started in July. Had gardening leave with someone I work with at IBM, Tim Beatty, who is a brilliant co-founder. I'm very lucky, and we're called Stellafai. The word Stellafai means to place amongst the stars. So, given the context of the conversation we talked about today, achieving goals. So our mission is to help people achieve their outcomes. And we are trying to do this by providing support and assistance to help people be successful, both through technology, but also via humans, and a little bit, and combining the two as well. So we do things to help people define their goals, to measure progress, and then to actually navigate tools and techniques and tips to navigate their way to that success. What we're doing is very heavily based on the OKR framework. We're both big believers in it, and we've talked a little bit about some of the reasons. That's why today I used it a lot at Google, saw how powerful it was, and we observed a problem in the world, which is there are lots and lots of consultants, and they're quite expensive. You aren't necessarily guaranteed, if you pay a lot, to get good quality. But nevertheless, just that pure price point and the effort required to contract with them means that there's a huge number of people that have no access to that support to succeed. And we have this hypothesis that technology can hugely democratize access to those skills for individuals, for small companies, for teams, for charities, right up to big organizations. And connecting people with helping achieve goals, but also connecting them with purpose, why their work matters, will improve the human experience and help lots and lots of organizations and people fulfill their potential. And that really excites us as an opportunity. So that ability to democratize access to the knowledge and skills to succeed with your outcomes, that's what we're trying to do. A massive change, as you pointed out, from my 20 years in enterprise down to a company of 6 people from sort of 600,000. But what's interesting is in Steve Jobs' Stanford commencement speech, there's this line in that about trusting that the dots would connect. And I always thought that sounds nice, but how do you know which dots to build as you go? I now know I've had a fairly serendipitous career. I sort of bounced around between things that interested me. And suddenly now in this moment, those dots have connected. You know, the various roles I did as a consultant, my time in IBM and my time as a leader, my time working in a SaaS business at Google, being involved in sort of entrepreneurial activities at both companies. That's all sort of come together. And now it's this moment where it's like, this is where I'm meant to be. I'm ready to found a company. And it's not easy. It's very, very hard to switch off when everything's sort of resting on you and you're leading it. And there aren't many safety nets like you have in big companies. But I really, really love it. I've never felt so full of purpose and energy, and I'm very excited about what I'm doing, even if I'm a bit tired.
Well, definitely being on your own feels a bit exposed and a bit stripped down from feeling powerful. Now, how do you deal with that issue of self-worth when you're on top of everything?
Well, luckily I've got Tim, who's a co-founder, and we look out for each other. We had several conversations before we started around the stage we were at in life, what we wanted to get out of this point forward. We both had quite major things happen in our life. Personally speaking, I had a brain hemorrhage slap bang in the middle of COVID in September 2020, and it really I was extraordinarily fortunate to come out relatively unscathed, but it really made me examine my life choices around how much I worked, what I prioritized, and the impact I was having. And I've made a lot of very major changes. And I talked about, this cannot be the only thing. I do not want to be defined by the work I do anymore. I want to be defined by the impact I have, and that's broader than what I do, sitting at my laptop. So we look out for each other, and we make sure there's an element of balance. We do the same for our team. And I've got some warning systems that I've built in, some patterns that I've built up around how I work, rituals I have, how much I exercise, how I know. I have an aura ring. I don't know if you know about these. They're little digital well-being rings that every morning give me stats on my heart rate variability, kind of a proxy for stress and readiness and exercise scores. And if those start dipping down too low, I know I need to make changes. So I've got warning systems in place to try and make sure that I'm okay, that I'm happy and I'm healthy, but I'm also doing work that matters. So and Tim and I help us guard each other along that.
Well, that's fascinating device. I have not seen it before, so definitely we need to chat about that. Now, there you go. We both were talking about our challenges that we are facing right at the moment. I'm calling from Toruń, which is not really my ideal place to be, but sometimes things are out of our control. And one thing that I want to ask you about, which I think many startup founders face at the early stages especially, is the finances. How do you cope with having less money? Because, let's face it, startup at the beginning is not making enough money to cover all the expenses. And purpose is a lovely idea, but really purpose is not going to pay your bills.
Yeah, it's funny. We did some running tops. It just so happens that all the people that work with Stellafai are quite into exercise and running and things. So we did some shirts that have our logo on the front, and on the back they say "Powered by Purpose." But it's true. Purpose might make me run a bit faster, but it doesn't pay the bills. That's another benefit of forming a startup later in life, when you've had the ability to build up some savings. So Tim and I have invested quite a bit, and we modeled that. We've taken huge pay cuts, so 9 months no salary, and now if we have enough income coming in, we use that to pay ourselves. We're going back to like 2-3 years into our career level of salaries, so really dropped down. But it turns out, we both have partners that earn a bit of money, which helps. But it turns out that I was frittering away a lot of money on stuff that's just stuff. It's been relatively easy to drop meals at fancy restaurants and expensive wine, and I bought way too many clothes anyway, so I'm just wearing the ones I already had for a bit longer. And it's been easier than I thought. Now there will come a point where, if I'd have gone without any salary for another 9 months, that would have been a problem. But we've really a little bit like sort of that moment of wanting to change my life after what I call affectionately my brain pop. It's the same thing. It's a prioritization call. What really matters, what contributes to my health and happiness, versus what is just stuff and things that you might post about on Facebook, because that stuff might give you a fleeting moment of happiness, but it's not lasting joy.
No, absolutely. Bootstrapping is the key. Now, since we are talking about consumptionism and spending a lot of money, let's daydream and talk about who would you invite to a special location, any place in the world, and if that was any person in the world, who would you like to have a private breakfast with, and where?
So this is a good one, because I think it depends on my mood, but my answer for that today is, and I've been watching The Crown lately, is Princess Diana. So I know she's not here anymore, so we have to imagine I'm going back in time to do this. But I think she was just an absolutely remarkable person that, and maybe doesn't get the credit for. I think people look at Princess Diana and go, "Oh, she was beautiful," and that's doing her a huge disservice. So yes, she was beautiful, but she was so ahead of her time with the things she did, like going and seeing people with AIDS and touching them. That was just groundbreaking, and her empathy and her wisdom and her courage that she showed in going and strength, and all the criticism she took, and the things around landmines and raising the profile of that, and you see some of those values that she demonstrated in the public and charity work, and how she used her voice for the most enormous amount of good come through in her sons now, which I think is really lovely in very different ways, and I think sometimes in troubled ways, but I look at her as proper icon and a proper role model for how what I think is a great way to be a woman in this world and use your power and privilege to do amazing things and still be bold and courageous. There's not many people with all that privilege that you see going and having the voice and impact on the world that she did. So that's who I'd have breakfast with. Where I'd have breakfast, I've just got back from holiday, and I've just been to Menorca, which is one of my most favourite places in the world. There's a tiny little restaurant that was close to my grandmother, had a villa there, very close to where she was. And I don't think they even do breakfast, but it was called Sakuraba, but it very sadly just shut down. So given that Princess Diana is not with us anymore and Sakuraba is not with us anymore, I thought that would be the perfect place to go. It's a beautiful outside, geckos running around, palm trees and herbs. It's fantastic. So we'd go there and have something very Espanol for breakfast.
Well, that's a very spiritual wish we have tonight. Thank you, Bella, for sharing that beautiful moment with us. Indeed, when we talk about integrity and owning mistakes, Princess Diana was definitely one of the persons, role models we can look up to. And that's very much part of OKRs, right? You have to be able to talk about your mistakes and own them and admit to them as soon as possible, because that shows maturity and also helps in reshaping and restructuring, pivoting, all the things that are important for company success. Bella, is there anything exciting that is... Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted, that's such an interesting point that you just made. That's something that I hadn't ever really sort of fully called that out as a benefit, but this idea that you don't have to, no one has to say we're not succeeding. It's just there in the data. So then the focus is on how to fix it. In a situation where you need someone to say we're failing, that's hard. That requires lots of things to be in place. But if you're using key results, the needle hasn't moved. There's no blame attached to that needle. It's just a discussion about how you fix it. A really cool benefit of key results. Yeah, sorry.
Bravo. We are making last conclusions of the moment. We are heading towards the end of our show. Thank you so much, Bella. Let's talk about new exciting projects ahead of you. Is there anything you would like to share with us?
Oh, good. I think with Stellafai, that's my new exciting project that's going to have to do me for the moment. Like, one thing I might mention is we're the name of our company, so it's Stellafai, but spelled with an AI at the end, so STE, can't spell, LLAFAI, and that's because we want to use AI, and that comes in a bit around how can we use technology to help people, and we're really starting to lean into how we can leverage large language models like ChatGPT to accelerate helping people faster. So that's our biggest, most exciting project that we're working on at the moment at Stellafai, and it's amazing.
Well, amazing role model. Bella was our guest today. Success is the sum of small efforts, repeated day in and day out. Robert Collier says, repeated is definitely the way to do with AI, machine learning. That's how we are teaching all these exciting projects like ChatGPT and many others. And that's it from episode 109 of the PhD livestream. Thanks to our guest, Bella Bardswell. To stay updated and ensure you never miss a positivity hack delivered, follow Woman on It and turn on notifications to be alerted once a video has been released. Next week, we are going to have our guest live. We are going to talk about career, learning, motherhood, and the courage to make bold choices. That's another week. Next week, positivity hacks delivered as always at 6 p.m. CET, 5 p.m. EST, BST, and 12 p.m. EST. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to our today's show. As always, our positivity quote comes from Positive Thinking Only. and goes. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude, as Maya Angelou says. Today is your day to hug the future, hug the positivity you want. Thank you.